Greetings, family. Shalom to the Hebrew family. Shalom to the greeting. Shalom to the Hebrew family. Assalamu alaikum to the Muslim world. And I will also say Imhotep unto our people. And hello will not be used because again, hello is a European greeting, which we should not be using. Okay, beginning tonight, we will be addressing the history of the African slave trade. That's what we'll be addressing. Nothing will be untouched. No one will be given a pass. And what I mean by that, there are many that were involved in the African slave trade that we just want to simply give a pass to. And we will not give those people a pass. So we'll be talking about some people who will be upset. I just don't know what to say about that, not even concerned. But before we get to the African slave trade, first we have to understand the origin of this planet. Why is that important? First, we're going to start with the continents. One of the things that's been taught in schools around the planet that there are seven continents. There are not seven continents. At one time, the land mass was one. It was known as Pangea, Pangea. When the tectonic plates shifted, there were six continents that were created, not seven. There were six. Europe is not a continent. As a matter of fact, the first inhabitants of Europe were people called the Grimaldi people. This is well documented by Joel Augustus Rogers in his book. So there are some other things about the planet and its land and the origin that we just don't get taught in the schools. We're not going to be taught in the schools. Correct. Actually get to the slave trade. So again, the land was known as Pangea. We have six continents. Why isn't Europe a continent? Well, I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining why Europe is not a continent. Europe was created because the so-called European of today had no original land in which they could claim outside of the Caucasus Mountains. So therefore, they would take over the land after, of course, they would eradicate as many as possible the Grimaldi people. Their bones are found in many museums throughout Europe. You're not going to see them here in the United States, but they're very familiar with the Grimaldi history. So that is why Europe was created. So also we need to understand how was the map created? How and who was the first person who circumnavigated this planet and put this onto paper, this land as we know it? Well, it was a Muslim by the name of Muhammad el-Risi. Muhammad el-Risi was the first one who circumnavigated this planet and put this planet on paper. So he drew this land. You can look this up. Muhammad el-Risi was his name. So what we know today is the Atlantic Ocean was actually known as the Ethiopian Sea. So again, when the Europeans came on the scene, they changed that as well. So we have to understand what exactly they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. So what they're doing, they're trying to planet. So this is something that we have to push back on. So the Ethiopian Sea, again, ocean. Now, Africa, Africa, what is the origin of this name Africa? What is the origin of the land itself and the water around this planet? Where did humanity start? Well, first, let's go to some of the names of the land that we call Africa. It's known as Africa. It was known as Ethiopia. It was known as Tamari. But the oldest name that we have recorded and been documented is El Kibulan. That's Alkebulan. That's Alkebulan. This was researched by Dr. Yusuf bin Yakani, and this is found in his books. So when you read his books, you will find the oldest name of Africa. Again, that is known as El Kibulan. So Ethiopia was the origin of where man began. Ethiopia is what the origin of man began. Ethiopia. So when they say, well, we originated in Israel, which is nothing more than northern Africa, Israel is nothing more than northern Africa. We need to understand that. That's something we need to understand. Now I drew an outline. The reason I drew an outline, because if I didn't draw an outline, this could take a lot of time, and I want to make sure that I do not uh, present too much information. Because again, we'll be going over this over a series of days. There will be days every Tuesday. Matter of fact, we'll be addressing the slave trade. So now I'm about to go to one of the most difficult topics concerning uh, the origin of the slave trade, and it's called the Holocaust. I will not rush through this because this is something we need to understand. First of all, the Jews have perpetuated this story of them being the ones who had the Holocaust. Originally, the definition of a Holocaust referred to what took place during the transatlantic slave trade. So let's talk about Holocaust. What happened to the Jews versus what happened to the Africans? First of all, I'm going to start with the Jews. The Jewish Holocaust, as they call it, actually took place 1939 to 1945. Approximately 6 million Jews were exterminated. Now, there are some historians and some nations, some Muslim nations as well, and European nations that doubt that this so called Holocaust, the Jews say took place, actually took place. I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, it did take place. Let's say that it did. 6 million Jews died. Again, that's 1939 to 1945. What many people are not aware of is some of the tactics that were used to exterminate those Jews came from a woman from America by the name of Margaret Sanger, Sanger. Margaret Sanger. Who is Margaret Sanger? Margaret Sanger is the one who would coin the term, well, she had a friend of hers coined the term Planned Parenthood, birth control, started with Margaret Sanger. What was the purpose of birth control? To eradicate all black people off this planet. So, Margaret Sanger and other eugenicists, they actually would go along with what Adolf Hitler was doing. As a matter of fact, some eugenicists actually went to Germany and sat down with Adolf Hitler and his regime, or the Nazi Party as they call them, and they actually came up with a plan to exterminate the Jews based on what Margaret Sanger and eugenics in America came up with to eradicate us. So when they're telling you about the story about the Jews, they're not quite telling you the truth about the Jews. So who are these Jews? The Jews are nothing more than Europeans. They're white people. They're Caucasoids. That's all they are. They come from two places on the planet. They come from Eastern Russia. Those are called the Ashkenazi. And then you have those that come from Spain, which are called the Sephardi. So all they did was proselyte it in. So a Jew cannot be a Hebrew, and a Hebrew cannot be a Jew. So the land that is now occupied today, which they call Israel, was stolen from the original people. In 1948, they would create another Israel. That is the second Israel. The original Israel had the people which they called the Hebrews, the Limba, the Fulani. Those were the original inhabitants of that land. Now, according to Dr. John Henry Clark, religion as we know it is only an African allegory. That is all it is. So the Jews, the Hebrews, all of them, they have taken or plagiarized African allegories and turned it into what we call theology and we call religion. Now, let's go to the African Holocaust. The African Holocaust, excuse me, actually started in 700 AD, not 1444. That did take place too. We'll get to that in a moment. But it actually started in 700 AD. Well, what happened in 700 AD? We had the Muslims come in, the Arabs. They came in on the east coast of El Kibalan, which we call Africa, and started extracting our people, carrying our people back into the Muslim nations. And that's you began the slave trade with us. Now, was there slavery in Africa? Yes, there was slavery in Africa. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. But there are some out here that are saying that all Africans were involved in the slave trade. That is not correct. All Africans were not involved in the slave trade. So we must understand that all Africans were not involved. Now, the Arabs were very barbaric. Matter of fact, many people are not aware that the Arabs are the ones who started what we call the eunuchs. And what they would do is they would castrate the young African boys at 12 and 13 so they could not copulate with the black women. They would not be a threat to them. They would also leave our people along these trails and leave them out in the wilderness to perish when they became old. Some of this information, I'm going to show you two books that you can go and find. One is called the Black Holocaust for Beginners. The Black Holocaust for Beginners. This is one very good book that addresses most of what I'm telling you. Please go and purchase this book right here, The Black Holocaust for Beginners. And here's a second one. And each week I'll be showing you different books. Christopher Columbus, African Holocaust, right here by Dr. John Henry Clark, is yet another book. Each week I'll be showing you a different book or different books that you can read about the enslavement and what took place with us in what we call the Holocaust or the African slave trade. Now, the Holocaust. In the dictionary today, if you look up the definition of the word Holocaust, you'll notice under the word Holocaust, it says what transpired with the Jews. They changed the definition. That's not what was in there originally. So if you can find a dictionary that predates 1948, that's not what you're going to find in the definition. You'll find what it really said. It was talking about those African people that were inflicted during the slave trade. That's what it's talking about. It was not talking about those Jews. Those Jews took control of the education system worldwide, took control of that dictionary, and then here in the United States, you would have Webster. Webster was the one here in the United States that played a part in changing the definition here to what we now have. That's why you have the words black and white definitions have been changed. Holocaust definition has been changed. They introduced the word Jew, and then they want to replace the Hebrew, which you cannot. You cannot replace them whatsoever. So the Holocaust. Another word that we use is Ma'afa, Maafa, Ma'afa, the great disaster. So, how many people were extracted from Africa's coast during the slave trade that came to this hemisphere? Well, some historians, white and black alike, agree is somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 13 million, but some say it could be at a minimum of 100 million to 600 million Africans extracted. Let me say that again. Some historians say between 9 to 13 million were extracted, while others say estimating it could be as high as 100 million to 600 million. Now, let's pause for a moment because most people say, well, that number is just too much. It cannot be accurate. Yes, it can. Many people are not aware. Take your time and go look up the history of Liverpool. I'm just going to use Liverpool, England, for example. Liverpool, England was created for one reason and one reason only. Liverpool, England was created to import and export African slaves. That's all they done. One of the largest slave ship, if not the largest slave ship, which was the Brooks, the Brooks transported our ancestors. It was built to hold as many as 800. Now, Sir Francis Drake in 1555, he would be one of the most notorious runners we ever seen. And the reason why his name needs to be mentioned, because that's the first time the majority of our people ever heard or saw the name Jesus, not from the Bible. It was on the side of a slave ship. It was called the Good Ship Jesus. So many of us are not aware of this information. We believe that Jesus was someone who came and represented the people, and we learned about this man in a good way. But in actuality, this man had no good whatsoever in our history because, again, he was found on the side of a slave ship. this is something that is not very. So let's now touch a little bit on the beginning of the slave trade. So again, at the beginning of the slave trade, it actually started with our enslavement along the east coast of Africa. That would be the Muslims. This began in 700 AD. AD. That's when that began. But in 1444, then we would see Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator would go down into the motherland, Africa, El Kibalan, and he would extract 19 to 20 of our ancestors, return them to what we now call Portugal, thus beginning of the African slave trade for us coming into this hemisphere. Now, one of the strange oddities that many people are not aware of is that uh, the hurricanes that we experience every year, those hurricanes we experience every year, they follow the exact same route as the slave ship. The meteorologists used to say that hurricanes would start out in the middle of the ocean and then they would follow the path across to this hemisphere. But a hurricane is nothing more than a tornado, and tornadoes and hurricanes and monsoons, all of them need a few of the same things. You need a warm front, you need a cold front, you need water, you need land. You have to have all four to have that hurricane. So after Prince Henry the Navigator in 1452, we had a man by the name of Pope Nicholas V. Now, Pope Nicholas V is the Catholic Church. And by the way, almost every religion was involved in the slave trade. Nearly every one of them. Every one of them. As a matter of fact, the Catholic Church, their wealth is traced back to slavery. Not only were they involved in the slave trade, they were also pillaging Timbuktu, and they were stealing. Most of their artifacts that they have, they stole that from the motherland. So that must be understood. So Pope Nicholas V is the one who would sanction the enslavement of the Africans. But where did that idea come from? Well, a young man by the name of Bartolome de las Casas. Bartolome de las Casas was a bishop, and he came to the Americas. And when he saw what was taking place with those who they call Indians, he said that was an atrocity, and that's something that needed to be stopped. So, what would be better is we went down into Africa. We would go down into Africa, and we would enslave those heathens down there because they had no into Africa. There was no God. We were heathenish people. Thus, the slave trade would begin. So, in the country of Ghana, to this very day, there are over 38 castles that originally is where our ancestors would be held until it was time for them to take that voyage. The voyage would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 60 days, sometimes more depending on the weather. And of course, this was a very dangerous thing that was taking place because, first of all, it was a crime for this to take place. Here in the United States, the slave trade was actually supposed to stop in 1808. This is when they actually placed this in the Constitution that slavery would, or importing African slaves into America, would cease in 1808. We're very much aware that did not happen. They would continue on later into uh, that century, which was 1800s. So they surpassed the 1808. So this is a brief, very brief um, lecture on the African slave trade. And so every Tuesday, I will be addressing this subject and I'll be going further with information concerning the African slave trade. On tomorrow, I'll be taking any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, please write down your questions. And on tomorrow at 7 o'clock, I'll be taking questions concerning the African slave trade. On Saturday, it will be a PowerPoint presentation That PowerPoint presentation will be on the 4 Black women that came before Rosa Parks. That will be on Saturday. And so until tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock, I would say to everyone again, I would say shalom. I would say assalamu alaikum to the family. I would say hotep to the family. And I would say peace to the family.